Welcome. The archive is now open. Tonight, from our restricted collection, we are unsealing one case file documenting the unexplained phenomena of the Pacific Northwest. The accounts you are about to hear are not fiction. They have been meticulously sourced from Forestry Service logs, recovered hiker journals, and search and rescue database entries and preserved within this archive for professional review. The world believes these stories are lost to time. We ensure they are not forgotten. If you believe that certain knowledge must be preserved, subscribe to the Nocturnal archive and activate the notification bell to be alerted of our next acquisition. After reviewing these files, leave your own analysis or related experiences in the comments below. Now, find your comfort in the darkness. Let the noise of the day fade as we access the first file, item number 89B. The audio transcripts of Arthur Vane, recovered from the localized data storage unit at Sentinel Rock Light and Signal Station. The following files have been cataloged for review regarding the automation transition of Sector 4. Log entry, October 14th, 1989, 1,600 hours. My name is Arthur Vane, Senior Technical Contractor for the Maritime Signal Division. I am recording this log as part of the standard protocol for the final manned shift at Sentinel Rock. The handover is complete. The transport helicopter departed 12 minutes ago, and the sound of its rotors has finally faded from the air, leaving only the heavy, rhythmic wash of the Pacific against the base of the tower. I am now the sole occupant of this station. Sentinel Rock is not a picturesque structure. It is not one of those whitewashed cottages with a red roof that appear on postcards or in paintings of the coastline. It is a gray, concrete pillar, a monolithic cylinder driven directly into a jagged spire of basalt 15 miles from the nearest shore. It rises 110 feet above the high tide mark, a solitary finger of industry pointing at a low, overcast sky. There is no land around the base, no beach, no grass. There is only the landing pad, the iron walkway that rings the foundation, and the vertical drop into the churning water below. To be here is to be severed from the world. To be here is to stand in a place that human beings were not meant to inhabit, protected only by the thickness of the walls and the reliability of the machinery. For a man in my profession, this isolation is not a burden. It is a preference. My assignment here is technical and precise. Over the next 7 days, I am to oversee the final calibration of the automated systems. I will test the backup generators, align the new radio telemetry sensors, and ensure that the primary optic, the great glass lens that sits above me, can operate indefinitely without human intervention. Once my work is done, the heavy iron door at the base will be locked for the last time, and this light will turn itself on and off, guided only by photocells and timers, indifferent to the presence of man. I have spent the first hour establishing the baseline parameters for the station. The previous keeper, a man named Holloway, left the facility in acceptable condition, though I have noted a slight accumulation of salt residue on the gallery windows that will need to be addressed. The interior of the tower is cool and damp. It carries a specific scent that I have encountered in every lighthouse from Cape Flattery to Tillamook Rock. It is the smell of diesel fuel, old oil, ozone, and cold iron. It is a scent of preservation, of metal kept safe from the corrosive hunger of the sea air. I have unpacked my equipment in the watchroom, located just below the lantern gallery. This will be my primary workspace. The room is circular, lined with instrument panels and logbooks. In the center of the floor, the iron staircase spirals down into the darkness of the tower shaft, and another short metal ladder leads up to the glass room where the light lives. The silence here is heavy. It is not a true silence, of course. The ocean is never silent. Even on a calm day like today, there is a constant, low-frequency thrum as the swells collide with the rock foundation. It is a vibration more than a sound, a tremor that travels up through the concrete and into the soles of my boots. It is the heartbeat of the station. I find it soothing. In the city, the noise is chaotic. Traffic, voices, construction, the erratic static of civilization. Here, the noise is consistent. It is rhythmic. It allows the mind to settle, to align itself with the slow, deep breathing of the tide. 1,900 hours. The sun has set behind the cloud layer, and the light is now active. I am currently standing in the lantern room. This is the highest point of the station, a glass-walled chamber that offers a 360-degree view of the horizon. Or rather, it would offer a view if there were anything to see. Tonight, there is only the void. The heavy cloud cover has blocked out the stars and the moon. The ocean is a vast, shifting expanse of black ink, indistinguishable from the black sky above it. The only reality here is the lens. It is a first-order Fresnel lens, a masterpiece of 19th century engineering. It stands nearly 12 feet tall, a beehive of prism glass and brass fittings. It weighs several tons, yet it floats on a bath of mercury, rotating with a frictionless grace that defies its mass. I have checked the rotation mechanism. It is operating within optimal parameters. The lens makes one full revolution every minute. As it turns, it captures the light from the central lamp and magnifies it, focusing it into a concentrated beam that sweeps across the darkness. The sound of the rotation is hypnotic, a soft, rhythmic click-hum. Click-hum, click-hum as the gears engage. The beam of light cuts through the air, illuminating the suspended moisture, revealing millions of tiny water droplets hanging in the mist like diamond dust. Sweep, flash, darkness, sweep, flash, darkness. It is a perfect cycle, predictable, logical. I have spent the last hour observing the rotation, checking the timing against my stopwatch. It does not deviate by even a fraction of a second. There is a profound comfort in this precision. The world outside may be chaotic, the waves are unpredictable, the wind changes direction, the storms form and dissolve, but in here, inside the machine, there is only order. I have brewed a pot of coffee in the small galley kitchen on the 3rd level. The warmth of the cup in my hands is a sharp contrast to the chill of the air. I am sitting at the metal desk in the watchroom, reviewing the maintenance logs left by Holloway. The logs are mundane. He notes a replaced fuse in the number 2 generator. He notes a minor leak in the rainwater cistern, which he patched with sealant. He records the weather conditions, barometric pressure holding steady at 1,012 millibars, wind from the northwest at 15 knots, visibility moderate. There is nothing in these pages to suggest anything other than routine. This place is a machine and has been running smoothly for decades. I check the radio set on the main console. It is an older unit, a vacuum tube transceiver that hums with a warm, orange glow when active. I tuned it to the maritime distress frequency just to verify reception. There is nothing but static, a white noise hiss that sounds like rain falling on dry leaves. Occasionally, faint voices drift through the static fishermen miles away, or perhaps a tanker far out in the shipping lanes, but they are distant and unintelligible, just ghosts of conversation swallowed by the atmosphere. I turn the volume down low, leaving it as a background murmur. It serves as a tether, a thin, fragile wire connecting me to the mainland, reminding me that there are other people in the world, even if I cannot see them. 2,300 hours. I have completed the initial inspection of the lower levels. The diesel generators are housed in the basement, sitting on heavy concrete pads. They are massive, dormant beasts of iron and steel, smelling of grease. I ran a test cycle on the primary generator. It roared to life with a shuddering cough of exhaust, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, before settling into a steady, powerful chug. The vibration was intense. I could feel it in my teeth. I watched the gauges, voltage, oil pressure, temperature, all green, all normal. I let it run for 10 minutes, then shut it down. The sudden silence that followed was physical. It rushed back into the room, pressing against my ears. I walked back up the spiral stairs, my hands sliding along the cold iron rail. 144 steps. I counted them. It is good to count things. It keeps the mind sharp. The weather is turning. I can hear the wind rising outside, whistling through the metal grating of the gallery walkway. The heavy steel shutters on the lower windows are rattling slightly in their frames. The forecast calls for a low-pressure system to move in overnight, bringing rain and higher swells. This is of no concern. The tower has stood here for 80 years. It has weathered hurricanes, rogue waves, and the relentless erosion of salt. It is indifferent to the weather. And so am I. I am preparing to rest now. My cot is in the watchroom, unfolded near the warmth of the radio equipment. I have secured the hatch leading to the lantern room. The rhythmic sweeping of the light above casts a faint, rotating shadow on the wall of the stairwell. Light, shadow, light, shadow. It is like a pendulum marking the passage of time. I feel a sense of deep satisfaction. The station is secure. The systems are functional. The isolation is absolute. There are no distractions here. No phone calls, no demands. Just the wind, the water, and the light. I will sleep well tonight. The static from the radio is a steady hum. The rotation of the lens is a lullaby of gears and glass. Everything is exactly as it should be. Everything is under control. Log entry. October 15th, 1989, 0230 hours. Control is often an illusion maintained by daylight. It is easy to feel secure when the sun is visible, when the horizon is a sharp, defined line separating the sea from the sky. But here, night does not simply fall. It rises from the water. It swallows the station from the bottom up. I awoke 30 minutes ago. The transition from sleep to wakefulness was abrupt. There was no lingering drowsiness, just a sudden, sharp clarity, as if an internal alarm had triggered within my mind. The digital clock on the radio console read 2 exactly. The storm system I noted in my previous entry has moved closer. The vibration in the floor has changed pitch. It is deeper now. A resonant thrumming that travels up through the granite spire and into the iron bones of the tower. The wind has increased, whistling through the gallery, grating with a sound like a flute's being played by a breathless musician. I poured a cup of coffee from the pot I had left on the warmer. It was thick and bitter, reduced to a black sludge by hours of heat. I drank it anyway. The shock of the taste helped to ground me in the physical reality of the watchroom. My reflection in the darkened window was a pale ghost, hovering over the instrument panels. Beyond the glass, there was nothing. The darkness outside is absolute. The light from the lens above sweeps out, catches the driving rain, and terminates in a wall of gray mist. It reveals nothing of the ocean's surface. I sat down at the primary observation desk to conduct the scheduled mid-watch sweep. The centerpiece of this console is the radar unit, a Raytheon Pathfinder 1200. It is a heavy, boxy piece of equipment, encased in gray metal. The screen is a circular cathode ray tube, glowing with a dim, sickly green luminescence. This machine is my eyes. In these conditions, human vision is useless. The radar sends out pulses of microwave energy, invisible fingers feeling through the fog and the dark. When they hit an object, a ship, a buoy, a landmass, they bounce back, painting a glowing smear of light on the phosphor screen. I adjusted the gain and the sea clutter suppression, tuning out the noise of the waves. The sweep arm on the display began its clockwise rotation. Hum, sweep, hum, sweep. It leaves a trail of fading green light in its wake. The line moves around the circle like the second hand of a clock, updating the picture every few seconds. For the first 10 minutes, the screen was clear. The center of the display, representing the station, was a solid blob of green light. The rest of the circle was empty, save for the occasional speck of static caused by rain density. Then, at 0214, the rhythm broke. The sweep arm passed the northwest quadrant, bearing 330. A shape bloomed on the phosphor screen. It was not a speck of static. It was a solid, defined return, a hard target. I leaned closer to the glass, the green light reflecting in my eyes. I waited for the arm to swing around again. 4 seconds. Hum. Sweep. The target was still there, brighter this time. I checked the range rings. The object was holding position at exactly 8 miles out. This was immediately incorrect. I know the shipping lanes in this sector. They are 12 miles to the west. No large vessel should be this close to Sentinel Rock, especially not in these conditions. The waters to the northwest are treacherous, riddled with submerged seamounts and unpredictable currents. I calculated the size of the return based on the scale of the display. The object was massive. It was not a fishing trawler or a pleasure craft. The radar signature suggested a displacement consistent with a container ship or a large tanker. a vessel of steel, hundreds of feet long. But a ship of that size does not simply appear at 8 miles. I would have seen it approaching on the long-range scan an hour ago. I would have tracked its progress. Radar does not blink things into existence. I grabbed the parallel index ruler and laid it across the screen, marking the position. I waited for the next sweep to determine its heading and speed. Sweep. The blip remained perfectly stationary. This, too, was impossible. In a sea state like this, with 15-foot swells and a 30-knot crosswind, even a vessel at anchor would drift. It would sway. The return on the screen would smear slightly as the ship pitched and rolled. This mark was razor sharp. It was fixed in space, as immovable as the lighthouse itself. I felt a prickle of irritation. Technology is fallible. Vacuum tubes degrade. Capacitors leak. It was likely a ghost return, a false echo caused by atmospheric ducting. Sometimes, a temperature inversion can trap the radar waves, bending them down to the ocean surface where they bounce off a patch of rough water and return to the sensor, mimicking a solid object. It is a common anomaly, a phantom created by the weather. I reached for the tuning dial, intending to adjust the frequency and clear the interference. But before I touched the knob, I stopped. If there was a ship out there, a vessel in distress, drifting without power, it was my duty to verify it visually. I could not simply tune it out because the data was inconvenient. I stood up and unlatched the heavy steel door that leads to the outer gallery walkway. The wind hit me instantly, a physical blow that nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. The roar of the ocean was deafening, a chaotic crashing of water against stone. Rain lashed at my face, cold and stinging like buckshot. I stepped out onto the iron grating, gripping the railing with both hands. The metal was slick with spray. I raised my high-powered marine binoculars to my eyes and looked toward the northwest, bearing 330. I waited for the lighthouse beam to sweep past that sector. The great beam swung around, a solid cone of white light cutting through the rain. It illuminated the chaotic surface of the water, the whitecaps churning and frothing in the dark. There was nothing there. I lowered the binoculars and wiped the lenses, then looked again. The beam swept the area a second time, then a third. There was only the ocean, endless, violent, and empty. A ship that size would have running lights. It would have deck lights, masthead lights, emergency strobes, even if it were dead in the water. A dark ship. The beam from the tower would have reflected off its hull. I would have seen the glint of wet steel, the white superstructure, the silhouette against the waves. I saw only rain. I went back inside and secured the heavy door, spinning the locking wheel until the seal was airtight. The sudden silence of the watchroom was jarring. I wiped the rainwater from my face and sat back down at the console. I looked at the radar screen. The blip was gone. The northwest quadrant was empty. The green sweep arms circled the display, painting nothing but the fading trail of its own passage. I checked the history log on the plotter. It showed no record of the contact. It was as if the last 10 minutes had not happened. I sat there for a long time, watching the empty screen. I am a rational man. I understand the limitations of these machines. I know that sea clutter can look like a hull. I know that rain squalls can reflect radar energy. I know that the mind, when deprived of sensory input, seeks to find patterns in the noise. I opened the station logbook. I picked up the pen. I wrote 0230 hours. Radar anomaly observed in NW quadrant. Range 8 miles. Duration 4 minutes. Visual check negative. Probable cause, atmospheric backscatter due to storm front. I closed the book. The explanation is sound. It is logical. It fits the data. And yet, I find myself looking at the screen, waiting for the sweep to pass 330. I find myself listening to the wind, trying to separate the sound of the gale from the memory of that solid, unmoving green light. The coffee in my cup has gone cold. The vibration in the floor seems to have synced with my own pulse. The machine says the ocean is empty. My eyes say the ocean is empty. But for 4 minutes, the machine insisted that something massive was sitting in the dark, just beyond the reach of the light. Something that did not drift with the current. Something that did not rock with the waves. Something that was waiting. I will run a full diagnostic on the magnetron unit in the morning. It is likely just a calibration error, a ghost in the circuitry. That is what I will tell the report. Log entry. October 15th, 1989, 1,400 hours. The diagnostic of the radar magnetron yielded no results. The unit is functioning within factory specifications. The voltage is stable. The waveguides are clear of obstruction. There is no mechanical reason for the phantom return I witnessed last night. This leaves only the variable of the atmosphere itself, the unpredictable medium through which the signal must travel. I have decided to turn my attention to the communications array. If the storm is creating interference dense enough to fool a microwave radar, it stands to reason that it would also affect the high-frequency radio bands. I need to verify that I am not completely cut off from the mainland. A lighthouse that cannot speak is merely a tomb waiting to be sealed. The primary transceiver at Sentinel Rock is a Hallicrafter's S-38, a relic of the post-war era. It is bolted to the steel desk in the watchroom, a heavy box of black metal and analog dials. It smells of heated dust and ozone when it runs, a scent that intensifies the longer the tubes remain warm. I sat down before it, the leather of the chair creaking in the quiet room. The storm outside has settled into a monotonous, gray endurance. Rain sheets against the gallery windows, blurring the world into streaks of charcoal and slate. The only light in the room comes from the orange glow of the radio's frequency dial and the pale, rhythmic sweep of the lens rotating overhead. I engaged the power switch. The unit hummed to life, a low, rising tone that stabilized after a few seconds. I adjusted the gain, bringing the volume up from a whisper to a steady, conversational level. The speaker crackled. It is the sound of the ionosphere, the cosmic background radiation of the planet. Hiss, pop, hiss. It sounds like sand pouring over dry metal. I began to cycle through the standard maritime channels. Channel 16, the international distress and hailing frequency, was a wash of white noise. I tuned slowly, my fingers moving the vernier dial with the precision of a safecracker. I was looking for voices, the chatter of coastal fishing fleets, the status reports of tugboats in the strait, the weather bulletins from the Coast Guard station at Astoria. There was nothing. The silence was absolute, save for the static. It was as if the storm had erected a wall of electromagnetic interference around the rock, filtering out the human world and leaving only the raw, chaotic noise of the elements. I decided to conduct an active test. I needed to hear a voice. Even if it was just a bored dispatcher confirming my signal strength. I unhooked the heavy hand microphone from its cradle. The black plastic was cold against my palm. I depressed the talk button. The static on the speaker cut out, replaced by the silence of the carrier wave. Sentinel, rock light, and signal station, I said. My voice sounded flat in the small, acoustically dead room. Testing frequency, radio check, over. I released the button. The static rushed back in, filling the void. I watched the signal strength meter. The needle quivered near the bottom of the scale, dancing with the noise floor. I waited. 10 seconds passed. 20. No response. I tried again, enunciating clearly, projecting my voice as if I could push the words through the storm by force of will. Sentinel Rock, calling any station. Signal, check. Over. I released the button. I leaned in, turning my ear toward the speaker grid, straining to hear a response through the wash of interference. And then, it came. It did not come from the static. It did not possess the crackly, distant quality of a transmission traveling over 15 miles of rough water. It was clear. It was immediate. It possessed a fidelity that the old Hallicrafter's unit should not have been capable of reproducing. Sentinel Rock Light and Signal Station, the voice said. Testing frequency, radio check. Over. I sat frozen. My hand hovered over the volume knob. The voice was not a dispatcher. It was not a fisherman. It was me. It was not merely a similar voice. It was my voice. It was the exact timbre, the exact cadence, the exact drop in pitch at the end of the word station. It captured the slight roughness in my throat from the dry air of the tower. It even captured the intake of breath before I had started speaking. I stared at the radio. The tubes glowed with their indifferent orange light. Rationality is a reflex. It is a muscle that must be flexed immediately, when confronted with the absurd. My mind instantly began to categorize the phenomenon. This was a feedback loop. It had to be. Old radio equipment is notorious for its quirks. Perhaps the transmission had been captured by a repeater station on the mainland, some automated buoy or relay tower, and bounced back to me. A simplex repeater records a transmission and retransmits it on the same frequency. It is a common tool for extending radio range. Yes, that was the logical explanation. I had triggered an automated repeater. The clarity was simply a result of the signal strength. But a repeater has a delay. It takes time to record, time to switch from receive to transmit. The timing of the response had been strange. I decided to test the hypothesis. If it was a machine, it would repeat whatever input it received. I keyed the microphone again. This time, I did not use standard protocol. I wanted to use a string of words that had no context, something that could not be part of a pre-recorded message. 1, I said. 5, 9, shadow, vector. I released the button. I watched the second hand on the wall clock. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5. The static broke. 1, the voice said. 5, 9, shadow, vector. My stomach tightened. The sensation was physical, a cold contraction beneath my ribs. It was the repetition again. Perfect, flawless. But it was the pause that disturbed me. 5 seconds. I keyed the mic again. Immediately. Stop. I released it. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5. Stop, the voice said. The latency was consistent. 5 seconds, exactly. I leaned back in the chair, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This confirmed it. It was a machine. It was a mechanical echo, a repeater with a 5-second buffer. The clarity of the voice was unsettling, yes, but technology often produces uncanny results when malfunctioning. I reached for the logbook to note the interference. I wrote, 1,415 hours. Radio check unsuccessful. Encountering simplex repeater interference on primary frequency. Signal is looping. I looked at the words on the paper. They were safe words, technical words. They boxed the anomaly up and put it on a shelf labeled Known Issues. I reached out to turn off the radio. I had my hand on the power switch. The hum of the unit was steady. The static was a soft, rhythmic wash. And then, the speaker crackled again. I had not touched the microphone. I had not transmitted. The room was silent, but the voice came back. 1, it said. My hand froze on the switch. 5, it said. 9, it was playing the recording again. Shadow, vector, stop. It was stitching the two transmissions together. It was editing them. A simple repeater does not edit. It records a burst, transmits it, and wipes the buffer. It does not store multiple transmissions and rearrange them. I sat there, staring at the black metal box. The static returned. I waited. Shadow, the voice said. Shadow, shadow. It was my voice. But the inflection was changing. The first shadow was the one I had spoken, flat, testing. The second shadow was softer, almost a whisper. The third shadow rose in pitch, like a question. Shadow. My heart hammered against my ribs. The sweat on my forehead felt suddenly cold. This was not a repeater. A machine cannot change the inflection of a recording. A machine cannot take a raw sound wave and manipulate the emotion behind it. Vector, the voice said. It sounded wet. It sounded like the word was being pushed through a throat filled with fluid. Vector, vector, vector. The speed increased. The distinct pauses between the words vanished. It became a rapid-fire stutter. Vector, 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 vector. I snapped the power switch down. The orange light faded. The hum died. The voice was cut off in mid-syllable. Silence rushed back into the room. I sat in the quiet, listening to the wind battering the glass. I looked at the microphone resting in its cradle. It looked like a dead thing, a piece of molded plastic and wire. I told myself it was a short circuit, a capacitor discharging erratically, a cross-modulation with a commercial broadcast. I stood up and walked to the galley. I needed water. My mouth was dry. As I poured the glass, my hand shaking slightly, I tried to force the logic back into place. I am a technician. I fix broken things. The radio is broken. That is all. But as I drank the water, I couldn't stop hearing the last iteration of that word. Vector. When I said it, it was a technical term, a direction, a line on a chart. When the radio said it back to me, it didn't sound like a direction. It sounded like a hunger. I will leave the radio off for the remainder of the shift. The solitude is preferable to that echo. I have plenty of work to do on the lens gears. Mechanical work, simple gears, metal teeth that lock together, things that cannot speak. I will focus on the gears. Log entry, October 16th, 1989, 0415 hours. The work on the rotation gears consumed 3 hours. It was a deliberate choice. I disassembled the primary drive casing, cleaned the teeth of the main cog with solvent, and reapplied the heavy lithium grease that keeps the friction at bay. The smell of the solvent was sharp and chemical, a welcome distraction that burned in the back of my throat, overpowering the stale air of the tower. I focused entirely on the mechanics, metal against metal, the precise torque required for each bolt, the satisfying heavy resistance of the wrench. These are things that can be understood. A stripped bolt has a cause. A worn gear has a solution. When I finally reassembled the housing and engaged the motor, the rhythm of the lens returned, smoother than before. Click, hum, a heartbeat of engineering. I wiped the grease from my hands with a rag, watching the black stains transfer from my skin to the cloth. I felt calm. I felt anchored. But as I stood there, wiping my fingers one by one, I realized that the sound of the station had changed. The wind had stopped. The whistling through the gallery grating, which had been a constant companion for 24 hours, was gone. The rattling of the shutters had ceased. Even the deep, resonant vibration of the ocean against the tower base seemed muffled, as if the world outside had been wrapped in heavy wool. I climbed down the short ladder to the watchroom. I looked at the barometer on the wall. The needle had dropped further, but it was steady. I stepped to the window. The rain had stopped, replaced by something far denser. Fog. It had rolled in while I was working on the gears, a silent invasion that had swallowed the ocean whole. It was not the wispy, drifting mist of the morning. This was a sea fog, thick and white and opaque. It pressed against the glass like a physical weight. The beam of the lighthouse above me no longer swept across a dark horizon. Instead, it struck the wall of fog just a few feet beyond the glass, creating a blinding, rotating flash of white light that illuminated nothing but the moisture itself. Flash, white, darkness, flash, white, darkness. It was suffocating. The tower felt smaller, the walls closer together. I sat down at the console, intending to update the weather log. My hand moved to the pen. My eyes, out of habit, drifted to the radar screen. The green sweep arm was circling. Hum, sweep. And there it was. The blip was back. It was not 8 miles out this time. It was not a distant, ambiguous ghost. It was sitting at the edge of the inner ring. Range, 500 yards. My pen dropped to the desk. It rolled across the metal surface with a small, hollow sound that seemed incredibly loud in the quiet room. 500 yards. That is point-blank range. That is just beyond the breaking waves at the base of the spire. A vessel of the size indicated by the return, a mass of steel equal to a tanker, could not be that close without running aground. The depth charts for this sector show a submerged ridge just 300 yards to the northwest. To be in that position, the ship would have to be hovering over the rocks. And yet, the signal was solid. It was burning bright green on the phosphor, a hard, unyielding knot of light. I stared at it. I waited for it to move. I waited for the drift that must happen in a current. It remained perfectly still. I felt a coldness spread through my chest. It was the coldness of a man who looks at a compass and sees the needle pointing south. It is the nausea of wrong geometry. I had to see it. I knew, logically, that I would see nothing. The fog was too thick, but the proximity demanded verification. If there was a ship 500 yards off the rock, it was in imminent danger of destruction. I put on my heavy oilskin coat. I took the large, rubberized flashlight from its charging cradle. I picked up the marine binoculars. I unlocked the gallery door. The wheel turned with a heavy groan of steel. I pushed it open. The air that hit me was not windy, but it was freezing. It was a damp, clinging cold that seemed to seep through the layers of my clothing instantly. The silence was profound. The ocean was there. I could hear the slow, heaving wash of the swells against the stone, but the sound was flattened, stripped of its violence by the dense atmosphere. I stepped out onto the walkway. The metal grating was slick with condensation. I gripped the railing, my knuckles white. The fog was a wall. It swirled around the tower, thick and gray. I could taste it. It tasted of brine, yes, but there was something else under the salt. A smell like wet copper. A smell like stagnant water in a deep cave. I raised the binoculars. I looked to the northwest. I waited for the lighthouse beam to come around. Here it comes. The beam swung past my head, a solid bar of light cutting into the soup. It illuminated the water for perhaps 50 yards before dissolving into the whiteness. I saw nothing. I lowered the glasses. I was about to turn back, to retreat to the warmth of the watchroom and the lie of the radar glitch. Then, I saw the lights. They were not on the water. They were suspended in the fog, perhaps 40 feet above the surface. They were faint, barely visible against the gray backdrop, a series of pale, greenish-yellow points of light. I raised the binoculars again, my hands trembling slightly. I adjusted the focus wheel, fighting the lack of contrast. The lights sharpened. They were arranged in a pattern, a vertical line of 3 lights, representing a masthead, a single red light to the left port side, a single green light to the right starboard. It was the lighting configuration of a large sailing vessel or a trawler, but the quality of the light was wrong. Electric navigation lights are sharp. They are incandescent bulbs, or LEDs. They pierce the darkness with a specific, hard intensity. They have a filament. They have a source. These lights were soft. They were diffuse. They looked like nebulous clouds of luminescence rather than bulbs. They pulsed slightly, a slow, rhythmic dimming and brightening that reminded me of breathing, and they were absolutely still. I watched them for a full minute. I counted the seconds. The ocean below was moving. I could feel the vibration of the swells hitting the rock. The tide was running. The air currents, however slight, were shifting the fog, but the lights did not bob. They did not sway. They did not dip with the roll of a hull. They were fixed in space, rigid. If they were attached to a ship, that ship was frozen in a block of ice. But there is no ice here. There is only the heaving, restless Pacific. A ship cannot be that still. It is physically impossible, unless it is not a ship. I lowered the binoculars, but I kept my eyes on the faint, greenish pattern. I tried to construct a rational model. Perhaps it was a reflection of the lighthouse beam. No, the color was distinct. Perhaps it was a trick of the fog, a Brocken specter phenomenon. No, the geometry was too precise. The configuration was mimicking a ship. It was presenting the visual language of safety. Red for port, green for starboard. I am a vessel. I am like you. But the scale was slightly off. The distance between the port light and the masthead lights was inconsistent with standard maritime architecture. It was too narrow. It looked like a child's drawing of a ship, executed in light. And then, the pattern changed. As I watched, the starboard green light moved. It did not move like a light attached to a swinging boom. It slid. It traveled horizontally to the right, smoothly, like a drop of oil on a glass pane. It moved 10 feet away from the center cluster, extending the hull of the phantom ship. Then the port red light did the same. It slid to the left. The ship was growing. It was widening. The masthead lights began to separate, drifting upward, elongating the vertical axis. The geometry was fluid. The constellation was rearranging itself. I felt a surge of primal revulsion. It was the same feeling one gets when seeing a spider uncurl its legs, or a snake unhinge its jaw. It was the biological horror of transformation. The lights were not mounted on steel, they were independent, or they were connected by something I could not see in the dark. Something vast and black that hung in the fog, adjusting its bioluminescence to match the expectations of the observer. It was testing the image. It was adjusting the lure. I backed away from the railing. My heel caught on the metal grating, and I stumbled, catching myself against the cold iron wall of the tower. The lights remained still in their new configuration, waiting. I scrambled for the door. I grabbed the wheel and spun it, hauling the heavy steel plate shut with a clang that rang through the tower. I spun the locking mechanism until my muscles burned. I stood there in the watchroom, chest heaving, back pressed against the door. I looked at the radar screen. The green blip was still there, 500 yards, stationary. I looked at the window, the fog pressed against the glass, a blank, white face. I know what I saw. I saw a mimicry of order. I saw the ocean attempting to draw a picture of a ship. I am going to turn off the radar. I do not want to see the green light anymore. I am going to sit here, under the electric lamp of the desk, and I am going to read the technical manual for the diesel generator. I will read the specifications for torque and compression ratios. I will fill my mind with numbers that do not change, because out there, 500 yards away, the geometry is fluid, and it is watching to see if I notice the error. Log entry. October 16th, 1989, 1,845 hours. The technical manual for the Caterpillar D300 series diesel engine is a document of 312 pages. I have read it twice. I have memorized the torque specifications for the cylinder head bolts. I have traced the schematic diagrams of the fuel injection system with my finger, following the lines of ink as they intersect and diverge like the streets of a city I will never visit. I have focused on the numbers. Numbers are safe. They do not change when the fog rolls in. A compression ratio of 16:1 is a constant, regardless of what lights might appear in the mist outside the window. I have kept the radar unit powered down. The screen is a dull, gray, convex glass, reflecting only the dim overhead bulb of the watchroom. I do not know if the green blip is still there, hovering at 500 yards. I do not want to know. By denying it the power to display itself, I have removed its existence from my immediate reality. The radio, too, has remained silent. I switched it off hours ago, severing the connection to the outside world to silence the echoing voice. The silence in the tower has been absolute, broken only by the rhythmic mechanical sounds of the station itself, the rotation of the lens, the hum of the ventilation fans, the distant, muffled thud of the ocean against the stone. I am sitting at the desk, the manual open before me. My watch reads 1850, 10 minutes to the hour. I reached for my mug of coffee. It was lukewarm. As I lifted it, the hair on my arm stood up. It was a physical sensation, a sudden electrostatic charge that seemed to fill the room. The air tasted sharp, metallic, like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. The radio receiver, the heavy black Hallicrafter's unit sitting dormant on the shelf, clicked. It was not the loud clack of the power switch being thrown. It was the soft, internal sound of a relay engaging. I watched, frozen, as the amber backlight of the frequency dial flickered to life. The vacuum tubes inside the casing began to glow, warming from a dull red to a bright, steady orange. I had not touched the machine. The power switch was still in the off position. A low hum filled the room, the sound of the carrier wave initializing. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the metal floor. I reached out to pull the power cord from the wall socket. I wanted to kill it. I wanted to sever the copper vein that fed it electricity, but before my hand could reach the outlet, the static cleared. There was no hiss, no pop, just a sudden, terrifying clarity. Log entry, the voice said. I stopped. My hand hovered in the air near the socket. It was my voice, but it was not the voice I hear in my head. It was the voice I hear on tape recordings, slightly thinner, slightly flatter, and the cadence was wrong. It was disjointed. The words did not flow into one another. They were stacked side by side like bricks. Log. Entry. It repeated. October 16th, 1989. The pauses were dead air. Absolute silence between the syllables. 1900 hours. I looked at my watch. The second hand was sweeping past the 12. It was 1852. The voice was time-stamping a record for 8 minutes in the future. I slowly lowered my hand. I stepped back, putting distance between myself and the machine. I felt a cold sweat breaking out on my back, beneath my shirt. The voice continued. It was reading a report. Primary. Generator. Failure. It said. The word failure sounded wet, as if the speaker had too much saliva in their mouth. Cause. Identified. As fuel. Line. Obstruction. I listened, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The primary generator was running in the basement right now. I could feel its vibration through the soles of my boots, a steady, powerful thrum. It was working perfectly. Automatic. Transfer. Switch. Engaged. The voice droned. Station. Operating. On. Emergency. Battery. Reserve. Auxiliary. Lighting. Active. Visual. Contact. Re-established. At. Base. Of. Tower. The voice stopped. The radio did not turn off. It simply went silent, the amber light burning like a single, unblinking eye. I stood in the center of the room. 1854. This was a trick. It had to be. A sophisticated prank. Perhaps someone on a nearby vessel, concealed in the fog, was recording my previous transmissions, splicing them, and broadcasting them back to me. But I had never transmitted a report about a generator failure. I had never spoken those words into the ether, unless the entity, the thing in the fog, could construct words from the raw phonemes of my speech, unless it had recorded enough of my voice to build a dictionary of sounds, and was now using them to write its own script. But why? Why broadcast a maintenance report that was factually incorrect? The generator was running. I could hear it. I walked to the heavy iron door that led to the spiral staircase. I opened it. The sound of the diesel engine drifted up from the basement, a loud, reassuring clatter. Chug, 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 chug. I looked at my watch. 1856. I hesitated. Protocol dictated that I go down and check the engine. If there was a potential obstruction, I should inspect the fuel lines. But the voice had said 1,900 hours. If I went down there now, would I find the obstruction? Or would I be the obstruction? Fear is a heavy thing. It creates inertia. I found that I could not make myself descend those stairs. The darkness of the shaft below seemed thicker than usual. The smell of oil seemed stronger, cloying. I closed the stairwell door. I locked it. I went back to the desk. I sat down. I watched the second hand on the clock on the wall. 1858. The generator was still running. I could feel the vibration in the desk. 1859. The second hand swept around. 30 seconds. 40 seconds. 50. I held my breath. The second hand hit the 12. 19 hours. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The vibration continued. The lights remained steady. I let out a breath. It was a lie. It was a scare tactic. A ghost story, told by a machine. Then, the vibration stopped. It didn't sputter. It didn't cough. It simply ceased. The sudden absence of sound was deafening. The heavy, rhythmic thudding that had been the heartbeat of the station for days vanished in an instant. 1 second later, the overhead lights died. The room was plunged into absolute darkness. I sat there, gripping the edge of the desk, my eyes wide, seeing nothing. Click. The emergency relay tripped. The auxiliary lights flickered on. They were dim, battery-powered bulbs encased in wire cages, casting a sickly yellow light that barely reached the corners of the room. The shadows stretched out, long and distorted. The silence was suffocating. Without the generator, the station felt dead. Then, the radio spoke again. primary generator failure, it said. The tone was identical to the broadcast from 8 minutes ago. Cause identified as fuel line obstruction. It was narrating my reality in real time, or rather, it was confirming the script it had already written. I realized then the true nature of the horror. It was not that the generator had failed. Machines fail. Fuel lines clog. It was the implication of control. The entity in the fog did not predict the future. It dictated it. It had reached into the station physically or otherwise and stopped the engine at the precise second it said it would. It was demonstrating its reach. It was showing me that the thick concrete walls, the locked doors, the systems I trusted, none of them offered any protection. Automatic. Transfer. Switch. Engaged. The voice continued. I looked at the panel. The amber light for battery power was illuminated. Visual. Contact. Re-established. At. Base. Of. Tower. My blood ran cold. That was the last line of the broadcast. Visual contact re-established at base of tower. I am on the 4th level. The base of the tower is 100 feet below, down near the waterline. There are no windows down there, only the solid concrete foundation and the iron landing door. To establish visual contact at the base, one would have to be outside, or one would have to be looking through the external security camera. I have a monitor for the external camera. It is a small, black and white screen on the lower console. It is meant to allow the keeper to see who is at the door before unlocking it. The screen was dark. The camera required AC power. It did not run on the emergency battery loop. I stared at the black glass of the monitor. The radio static hissed. Visual contact, the voice whispered. And then, the monitor flickered. It shouldn't have. The circuit was dead. But static bloomed across the screen. A snowstorm of gray pixels. The image stabilized. It was a grainy, low-resolution view of the iron walkway at the base of the lighthouse. The fog was swirling around the metal grating. The sea was a dark blur in the background, and standing there, directly in front of the lens, was a figure. It was wearing a heavy oilskin coat. It was wearing a watch cap, pulled low over its forehead. It was standing with its back to the camera, facing the iron door. The coat was mine. The hat was mine. The height, the build, the posture. It was me. The figure on the screen raised a hand and knocked on the steel door. Thud, thud, thud. The sound did not come from the monitor. It came from deep below me, vibrating up through the spiral staircase, resonating through the hollow shaft of the tower. 3 heavy, deliberate knocks on the exterior door at the base of the lighthouse. I am sitting in the watchroom. I am alone. But down there, in the dark and the fog, I am waiting to be let in. The knocking ceased as abruptly as it had begun, leaving the silence of the lower shaft to hang in the air like a suspended breath. The image on the security monitor flickered once, the gray snow of the static rising in a chaotic tide, before the screen collapsed into a single, shrinking dot of white light that faded to black. The connection was severed. Whether by the failure of the battery reserves or the physical destruction of the camera unit, I could not determine. I was left with only the audio. The station, stripped of its diesel heartbeat, had taken on a new, terrifying rhythm. The emergency batteries now powered the primary fog signal. Every 60 seconds, the great diaphanous horns mounted on the gallery deck would draw in a massive volume of air and expel it in a low-frequency blast that shook the dust from the ceiling tiles. B. L. 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 A. R. 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 The sound is felt more than heard. It is a vibration that resonates in the hollow cavities of the chest, a physical pressure that blurs vision and rattles teeth. It lasts for 4 seconds. Then, silence. 56 seconds of absolute, ringing silence. I sat in the yellow gloom of the watchroom, counting the intervals. The second hand on the wall clock moved with agonizing slowness. Tick, tick, tick. It was in these intervals of silence that I began to classify the sounds coming from the exterior of the tower. At first, I believed the knocking had resumed. I heard a dull, rhythmic impact against the concrete, far below. But as I concentrated, Filtering out the ringing in my ears left by the foghorn, I realized the acoustic profile was different. The knocking had been sharp, metallic, the sound of knuckles or something resembling knuckles striking steel. This new sound was softer, wet. It sounded like a heavy, sodden canvas being slapped against a wall. There was a suction component to it, a squelching noise that accompanied the detachment of the object from the surface. Slap, squelch, drag, slap, squelch, drag. It was not coming from the door. It was coming from the walls. I stood up and moved to the radar console. The screen was still dim, powered only by the residual charge in its capacitors, fading slowly. I peered at the glass. The green blip, the hard target that had hovered at 500 yards for hours, was gone. The sweep arm was frozen, but the phosphor ghost of the last scan showed a clear quadrant. The ocean was empty. A vessel of that displacement does not vanish. It does not submerge. Even if it had sunk, the disturbance in the water would have created a radar return for minutes afterward. Therefore, the object had not left. It had merely closed the distance to zero. I moved to the window. The fog pressed against the glass, illuminated intermittently by the yellow glow of the emergency cage lights. I began to formulate a hypothesis. It is the only defense I have left. I believe I have fundamentally misidentified the nature of the anomaly. I have been operating under the assumption that I was observing a technological construct, a ship, a vessel, a machine capable of radio transmission. I applied maritime logic to the data. I looked for a hull. I looked for a crew. But the ocean is old. It is filled with things that have spent millions of years perfecting the art of survival in the dark. I thought of the anglerfish, Melanocetus johnsonii, a creature of the deep abyss that grows a bioluminescent lure from its forehead. In the crushing blackness of the midnight zone, it dangles a light that looks like food or a mate to attract its prey. It does not hunt. It waits. It uses the desire of the victim against them. I thought of the mimic octopus, Thaumoctopus mimicus, an invertebrate capable of altering its shape, texture, and color to impersonate toxic species, or rocks, or floating debris. It observes its environment and becomes whatever it needs to be to survive. I believe that what is outside this tower is a convergence of these biological imperatives, scaled up to a magnitude that defies current zoological understanding. The ship I saw on the radar was not steel. It was a biological mass, a single, colossal organism. The navigation lights I saw in the fog, the red, the green, the masthead configuration were not electric bulbs. They were chromatophores, giant, bioluminescent organs capable of changing color and position. The creature saw the ships that passed this coast. It observed their patterns. It learned that a certain arrangement of lights signals safety, that signals kin, so it arranged its own flesh to mimic that pattern. It created a lure to draw vessels onto the rocks, and the voice on the radio. If a parrot can mimic human speech by manipulating its syrinx, purely through auditory observation, is it impossible that an organism of this size could do the same? It has listened to the radio waves for decades. It has heard the chatter of fishermen, the reports of the Coast Guard, the loneliness of the lighthouse keepers. It learned the sounds. It learned that certain frequencies trigger a response. It learned that the voice of Arthur Vane opens doors. B-L-L-L-L-A-R-R. The foghorn sounded again, shattering my train of thought. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the vibration to pass. When the silence returned, the wet sounds were closer. Slap, squelch, drag. They were no longer at the base of the tower. They were level with the generator room. 30 feet up. It is climbing. It is not using the stairs. It is ascending the vertical face of the concrete pillar, pulling its massive, gelatinous bulk up the exterior surface. The suction sounds are the engagement and disengagement of thousands of adhesion points. I walked to the center of the room. I looked up at the iron ceiling that separates the watchroom from the lantern gallery. The creature is moving toward the light. Of course it is. It is a creature of the deep. It is drawn to the strongest source of illumination. Or perhaps it views the great Fresnel lens as a rival, another bioluminescent eye that must be extinguished. I looked at the radio. It was dark, lifeless, without the main power. But I knew, with a cold, clinical certainty, that if I were to plug it into the emergency circuit, the voice would be there. It would not be repeating the generator report anymore. It would be closer. I remember the figure I saw on the monitor. The figure, wearing my coat, my hat. If the creature can mimic a ship with lights, if it can mimic a voice with sound, can it mimic a shape with flesh? Did it mold a portion of its own substance into the rough approximation of a man? Did it stand before the camera to test the disguise, just as it tested the navigation lights in the fog? I imagined the texture of that figure. Not skin, but cold, wet cartilage. Not eyes, but sensitive patches of photoreceptive tissue. A mouth that does not open to a throat, but simply tears open to reveal the bioluminescence within. Slap, squelch, drag, 50 feet up, level with the fuel storage tanks. The station is shaking, not from the wind and not from the ocean. It is a subtle, rolling motion, as if the tower is being embraced by something incredibly heavy. The concrete groans under the added weight. I can hear the strain in the metal girders that support the gallery deck. I sat down on the floor, away from the windows. I opened the logbook one last time. My hand is steady. The writing is clear. Entry 012. Visual and radar contact lost. Auditory confirmation of external breach. Entity is ascending the tower structure. Hypothesis: biological mimicry of high complexity. The organism is not hostile in the traditional sense. It is simply absorbing. I paused. I listened. The dragging sound stopped. It has reached the gallery deck. It is just outside the heavy steel door I locked an hour ago. It is standing on the grating where I stood to use the binoculars. I can hear the metal groaning. The grating is designed to hold the weight of 2 men. It is bending under tons of pressure. There is no knocking this time. There is only a wet, heavy sound of something pressing itself against the steel door, exploring the seams, tasting the oxidation, and then a sound that I will carry with me into whatever comes next. From the other side of the door, muffled by 3 inches of steel, I heard a voice. It was not amplified by a radio. It was unassisted, organic. "Arthur," it whispered. It sounded like wet leather rubbing together. "Open." It knows my name. It knows the command for the door. I did not answer. I did not move. I am looking at the spiral staircase that leads up to the lantern room, the glass room at the top of the world. There is nowhere else to go. I will take the logbook. I will take the tape recorder. I will climb the last ladder. I will sit under the great glass eye of the lens, and I will wait for the glass to break. Log entry: October 16th, 1989. 1920 hours. I secured the hatch to the lantern room. The iron wheel turned in my hands with a heavy, final resistance, driving the locking bolts into the frame. The seal is airtight. I am now contained within the highest point of Sentinel Rock, a glass-walled capsule suspended 110 feet above the black water. The atmosphere here is distinct from the rest of the tower. The heat generated by the central lamp, magnified and trapped by the prisms, creates a localized climate that is stiflingly warm. It smells of hot oil, polished brass, and the sharp, electric scent of the mercury bath on which the great lens floats. The sound of the ocean is distant here, a muted, rhythmic roar filtered through the half-inch storm glass. The dominant sound is the machine itself. Click hum. Click hum. The massive cage of glass and brass sweeps around me. Flash. It captures the darkness and pushes it back. Sweep. It divides the world into sectors of light and shadow. I am standing on the metal grating that circles the lens apparatus. It is a narrow catwalk, barely wide enough for a man to stand. Below my feet, through the diamond-shaped gaps in the iron mesh, I can see down into the watchroom, where I was sitting only minutes ago. The room below is dim, bathed in the sickly, jaundice yellow glow of the emergency auxiliary lights. The shadows are long and sharp, stretching across the curved walls like the hands of a clock. I watched the empty chair where I had been sitting. I watched the logbook lying open on the desk. the pages fluttering slightly in the draft from the ventilation shaft. And then, the door at the bottom of the spiral staircase, the door I had locked, opened. It did not break. There was no sound of metal shearing, no screech of forced hinges. The lock simply disengaged. I heard the heavy bolt slide back with a wet, lubricated thunk, as if the mechanism had been oiled recently. The door swung inward. A figure stepped into the watchroom. From my vantage point directly above, I looked down at the crown of a head. I saw hair that was graying at the temples, combed back in the utilitarian style I have worn for 20 years. I saw the shoulders of a heavy, woolen coat, stained with diesel oil near the right cuff. I saw work boots, scuffed at the toe, leaving wet prints on the metal floor. I recognized the coat. I recognized the boots. I looked at my own hands, gripping the brass railing of the lantern gallery. I was wearing the same coat. I looked at my feet. I was wearing the same boots. The figure moved with a fluid, practiced grace. It did not stumble in the low light. It walked directly to the main console, its footsteps heavy and deliberate. It reached out a hand with pale skin and blunt fingers, and ran it along the edge of the radio unit. It was inspecting the equipment. My mind attempted to reject the visual data. I told myself it was a reflection, a trick of the curved glass of the lantern room projecting my own image onto the floor below. But the angles were wrong. The figure was independent of my movements. I was standing still. The figure was moving. It pulled the heavy leather chair away from the desk. The screech of the chair legs against the metal floor echoed up through the grating. It was a sharp, real sound. The figure sat down. It adjusted the coat, settling into the seat with a familiarity that made my stomach turn. It picked up the pen I had dropped. It turned the page of the logbook. It was assuming the watch. I stood frozen, hardly daring to breathe, terrified that the sound of my respiration would betray my presence, but the machine of the lens was loud enough to mask me. Click, hum. The figure below paused. It tilted its head, as if listening to the vibration of the tower. Then, slowly, deliberately, it looked up. I looked down through the iron mesh. It looked up through the yellow gloom. Our eyes met. It was my face. It was the face I have seen in the mirror every morning for 40 years. The same lines around the eyes, etched by years of squinting at the horizon. The same set of the jaw. The same pale scar on the chin from a childhood accident involving a bicycle chain. It was a perfect reproduction, but it was too perfect. It was a face constructed from a photograph, static and unmoving. The eyes did not blink. The pupils did not contract, even when the beam of the lighthouse swept over the grating, sending a cascade of refracted light down into the room. The expression was neutral, blank. It was the face of a man waiting for input. Then, the figure smiled. A human smile engages the eyes. It lifts the cheeks. It is a complex interaction of muscles. This smile was not complex. It was a simple lateral expansion of the mouth. The lips pulled back too far, stretching the skin beyond its elastic limit. The corners of the mouth reached the midpoint of the cheeks, revealing the tension in the tissue. And then, the jaw unhinged. It dropped open with a wet, tearing sound, like the separation of raw meat. There was no tongue inside. There were no teeth. There was no throat. The interior of the mouth was a cavity of soft, translucent tissue, and deep within that cavity, a soft, greenish light began to pulse. It was the same light I had seen in the fog, the bioluminescence of the deep ocean, the cold fire of the anglerfish. The light grew brighter, illuminating the interior of the watchroom from within the creature's own head. It cast long, strange shadows that danced on the walls. The figure reached out and picked up the handset of the internal intercom system. This is a hard-wired line that connects the watchroom to the lantern gallery. It does not rely on radio waves. It is a simple copper circuit. The speaker box mounted on the wall next to me crackled. I stared at the creature below. I saw its chest heave, inflating with air. I saw the pulsing light in its throat flare, brightening with the intake of breath. "Arthur," the speaker whispered. The voice was right beside my ear. It was intimate, clear. It had no static. The shift is over. I watched the creature's mouth. It did not form the words. The lips did not move. The sound was being generated by the vibration of the tissue inside the cavity. It was a biological speaker, resonating the air to mimic the frequency of my speech. "We have the log," the voice continued. "We have the light." The figure stood up. It looked at the spiral staircase that led up to the short ladder, the only entrance to my glass cage. "You are redundant." Redundant. The word hung in the warm air of the lantern room. I looked at the creature. It looked like me. It sounded like me. It knew the station. It knew the protocols. And in that moment, the horror was not that a monster had broken in. The horror was the realization that the monster was a better version of me. It would not tire. It would not complain about the cold. It would not miss a log entry. It would sit in that chair for 1,000 years, fueled by the damp air and the salt, maintaining the light with absolute biological perfection. It was evolved for this environment. I was merely a visitor. I was the flaw in the system. I was the biological component that needed sleep, that needed warmth, that felt fear. The creature was the upgrade. "Come down," the speaker whispered. "Join the crew." The figure walked to the base of the ladder. I heard the wet suction sound of its palm gripping the metal rung. It began to climb. I backed away from the hatch. I backed away until my spine pressed against the brass housing of the lens. The heat of the lamp burned against my back. I am trapped in a glass cage at the top of the world. Below me, the new keeper is ascending. I can see the green light of its throat illuminating the shaft as it rises, casting the shadow of the ladder rungs against the wall. Climb, pause, climb, pause. I have one option left, one final protocol. I must preserve the record. Log entry, supplemental recording, October 16th, 1989, 1935 hours. I have retreated to the far side of the lantern gallery. I am sitting on the metal grating, my back pressed against the cool glass of the outer storm panes. The heat from the central lamp is intense here, radiating outward in waves that distort the air. It is a dry, searing heat, smelling of ozone and high-voltage electricity. I have removed the cassette tape from the primary recorder. I have wrapped it in the oilskin pouch I use for my tools. It is a small, tight bundle, sealed against the moisture and the salt. This is the only evidence that remains. The logbook in the watchroom has been compromised. The entries there are being rewritten by a hand that mimics my own, but lacks the friction of human error. The official record will show a routine shift. It will show a generator repair. It will show a quiet night on the station. But this tape is the truth. I am looking at the rotation mechanism of the lens. The great brass gears are turning slowly, mesmerizing in their precision. Click hum. Click hum. There is a small maintenance void beneath the primary bearing assembly. It is a dark, greasy cavity where the mercury bath meets the drive shaft. It is a space designed for lubrication, not storage. I am placing the tape into this void. I am wedging it behind the main solenoid housing. It will not be found by a casual inspection. It will not be found during a standard automated system check. It will only be found when the lens eventually fails, perhaps in 10 years, perhaps in 50, and a human technician is sent to dismantle the core. To whoever finds this, do not look for me. Do not look for the man named Arthur Vane. The thing that is currently ascending the ladder is not a monster in the traditional sense. It is not a beast that destroys. It is a system that corrects. I understand now why it is here. The lighthouse is an anomaly. It is a bright, artificial star that we have nailed to the edge of the ocean. We have imposed our order, our geometry, our rhythm on a chaotic world. We force the darkness to blink on our schedule. The ocean has tolerated this intrusion for 80 years, but nature abhors a vacuum, and it abhors a singularity. It seeks to absorb the anomaly. It seeks to integrate it. The creature below, it is simply the ocean's way of accepting the lighthouse. It is becoming the keeper so that the station stops being an invasion and starts being a part of the ecosystem. It will run the light. It will keep the logs. It will answer the radio. It will be a perfect keeper. I can hear the hatch wheel turning. It is a slow, heavy sound, metal grinding against metal. Screech. The creature is not rushing. It knows there is no exit. It knows that gravity and geometry are on its side. I am watching the wheel spin. 1 rotation, 2 rotations. The locking bolts are withdrawing from the frame. I feel a strange sense of calm. The fear has evaporated, replaced by the cold clarity of a problem that has no solution. When a machine cannot be fixed, it is decommissioned. When a part is obsolete, it is replaced. I am the obsolete part. I will leave the recorder running for as long as the battery lasts. I will place it here, on the floor, next to the gear housing. The hatch is opening. The heat in the room seems to be rising. The smell of the ocean, that deep, wet, copper smell, is flooding into the gallery, overpowering the scent of the oil. The hand has appeared on the combing of the hatch. It is my hand. It is pale. It is scarred. It is wet. The fingers are gripping the brass rim. They are pulling the weight of the body upward. I can see the face now. It is rising into the light of the lens. The flash of the beam catches it every 4 seconds. Flash. It is smiling. Flash. The mouth is open. Flash. The light inside its throat is pulsing in time with the rotation of the lens. It has synchronized itself with the station. It is beautiful, in a terrible, geometric way. I am going to close my eyes now. I do not wish to see the final integration. I will listen to the gears. Click hum, click hum, click hum. The magnetic tape ends there. The spool continues to turn for another 45 minutes, recording nothing but the low, rhythmic hum of the rotation gears and the silence of the lantern room. There are no further voices. There are no sounds of struggle. There is only the mechanical heartbeat of the station, continuing its cycle without interruption. The Sentinel Rock Light and Signal Station was visited by a Coast Guard transport team 3 days later, on October 19, 1989. They arrived to conduct the final extraction of Arthur Vane and to formally certify the station for fully automated status. Upon arrival, the team found the external landing door securely locked from the inside. The heavy steel mechanism showed no signs of forced entry, corrosion, or tampering. When hailed by radio, the station responded immediately. A voice, identified by the transport pilot as belonging to Arthur Vane, granted them clearance to dock and provided accurate wind speed and barometric pressure readings. However, when the team breached the door and entered the tower, they found the facility completely devoid of human presence. The station was in a state of immaculate preservation. The floors of the generator room were clean, smelling of fresh lemon solvent. The brass fittings of the railings had been polished to a mere sheen. The primary diesel generator was running at optimal efficiency, the fuel lines clear, the temperature gauges holding steady in the green. Arthur Vane was nowhere to be found. His personal effects, his clothes, his shaving kit, his books were neatly packed in his duffel bag, which was sitting by the door in the watchroom, ready for transport. The cot he slept on had been stripped, the sheets folded with military precision. The only anomaly discovered during the investigation was the station logbook. The logbook lay open on the desk in the watchroom. According to the handwriting analysis conducted by federal investigators, the entries for the dates of October 16th, 17th, and 18th were written in Arthur Vaughan's hand. They matched his penmanship, his pressure, and his spacing with a 99.9% probability. The entries described routine maintenance. They noted the weather conditions. They recorded the successful testing of the automated systems. The final entry was dated October 19th, 0800 hours 10 minutes before the transport team arrived. It read, "Transition complete. System fully integrated. Keeper is no longer required." The ink on the page was still wet. An extensive search of the surrounding waters was conducted. Divers inspected the submerged base of the tower and the rocky seabed for 3 miles in every direction. No body was recovered. No shred of clothing. No equipment. No evidence of a fall or an accident was ever found. Arthur Vane was officially declared missing, presumed drowned, following a probable psychological episode brought on by isolation. The case was closed in 1990. The Sentinel Rock Lighthouse remains active to this day. It is listed on all maritime charts as a fully automated navigational aid. It requires no crew. It requires no food. It requires no sleep. Maintenance crews who visit the rock for annual inspections report that the station is unusually clean. They find that the gears are always greased. The windows are always free of salt. The light is always burning with a consistent, unwavering intensity. Some mariners who navigate the shipping lanes of Sector 4 have reported strange anomalies on their radios during heavy fog. They claim to hear a voice hailing them on the distress frequency, a voice that is helpful, calm, and familiar, a voice that warns them away from the rocks with a knowledge of the currents that seems almost supernatural. They say the voice sounds like a recording, perfectly stitched together, and they say that when they look at the light of Sentinel Rock through their binoculars, the beam does not look white. At the very center of the lens, deep inside the glass, there is a faint, pulsing rhythm of green bioluminescence. The ocean is a vast and patient archive. It absorbs our mistakes, it absorbs our structures, and occasionally, it absorbs us. The file on Arthur Vane is now resealed. The tape will be returned to the vault. The archive is now closed. The noise of the day has faded. The light sweeps across the dark water, keeping its watch so that you do not have to. Until we unseal the next file, sleep well. The archive is now closed. Until we unseal the next file, sleep well.